Okay, great. Regaining momentum. So here are the buckets of content that we're going to be covering today in these some 18 minutes of our presentation. What is Movementum? What is policy integration, and how do the SDGs fit in the mix? Why are SDGs and policy integration important in the first place? We're going to look at some examples of policy integration in sport, which I know will be helpful to you, but also tools that are available to you to implement policy integration and Movementum. Lastly, 10 takeaways that I hope will be helpful to you as well. So what is Movementum? Movementum really is three things. First, it's a conceptual crossroads of opportunity to achieve and support recovery in your community. It is, as you can probably see on screen, a marriage between two words, movement and momentum. Movement refers to all forms of health-enhancing movement, including through sport, recreation, and physical activity promotion. In the case of sport, organized sport, this is prescribed movement with a set of rules, etc., overseen by coaches, everything that you know a lot about. But every other form of movement is important. And the idea that movement that is, of course, now being restricted in the COVID environment is so important, yet unavailable to a lot of Canadians, is what movement here refers to. Momentum is the critical importance of trying to regain recovery and momentum in our community to come back to some sense of normalcy. So it's a conceptual crossroads of these two issues that are so apparent and so critically important in our community. Secondly, it's a mindset to benefit by policy integration. It's a way of thinking, in other words. As you apply your offerings in sport, you should be, if you're not already, looking to see how you can contribute to momentum in your community. Lastly, it's a virtual knowledge transfer event. And what I mean by that is I've conceived of the concept of regaining momentum. I've created a 2-hour knowledge transfer virtual event that I'm offering through provinces and territories. If you're interested to learn more about that initiative, you can contact me at my email, which I'll provide at the end of the presentation. So let's get going. What is policy integration? Essentially, it's the intersection of contribution, impacts, and results across policy domains. Firstly, the collaboration, the definition essentially is the collaboration of actors from 2 or more policy domains in order to integrate your aims and your concerns derived from one policy domain into another. It's really about working together to achieve shared results based on shared interests that you can contribute to across different areas of policy. So if you're working in sport, you can contribute and achieve shared results in social outcomes. You can contribute and achieve shared results in economic outcomes, and so on. What does it do? Well, it cross-cuts the boundaries of established policy domains, jurisdictions, levels, and sectors. So the thing to think about here is that it's not only about working with others whom you may not be working with now in other sectors of society, but it's also about working across jurisdictions and levels. So from the provincial level to the local level, from the national level to the provincial territorial level and downwards. And lastly, how does it do it? It does it in 4 ways. It applies these cross-cutting efforts across these 4 dimensions: a policy frame, subsystem involvement, policy goals, and policy instruments. A policy frame is essentially something that you know about. Policy frameworks are developed all the time by governments and other societal institutions to set direction for how they want to address a problem or offer a solution to an issue. The Canadian sport policy is an example of that. So too is Pathways to Wellbeing, the Canadian framework for recreation. But so too is the Common Vision, the Physical Activity Common Vision that was developed by FBT ministers responsible for sport and launched in 2018, and something that I had an intimate contribution in bringing to fruition. So these are frameworks that exist in our domain, but also other frameworks that help us to figure out how to work together across frameworks, across these policy frames. Subsystem involvement, that's essentially the sectors of society that are contributing by their offerings in one particular area. You in the sport recreation community are a subsystem in itself. Policy goals are those long-term visions, the back end of where you're going in terms of trying to make a contribution towards recovery and towards helping Canadians move more through sport and recreation. Policy instruments are the various ways and means by which we implement policy. This could be legislation, this could be regulation in government, this could be funding, this could be communications, any ways and means that you use to enact your policies through action. So that's how policy integration works. It's about really working across sectors and levels to achieve more by contributing more to different and new areas of community action. And so how do the SDGs fit in the mix? Well, the Sustainable Development Goals are really, really important as we think about policy integration. There are 6 of them that in particular are of great interest and great importance to the domain of sport. First, good health and well-being. This is a no-brainer. This is about the understanding that sport contributes to enhanced health and reduced chronic disease. Secondly, quality education. We know that our efforts in sport, recreation, physical activity include training and education, but they're also delivered through the education sector. So that's important too. Lastly, gender equality. We know that there is a great and very timely and needed important effort by governments, federally, provincial, territorial, locally, and by other sectors of society to focus on gender equality, to provide girls and women with the opportunities beyond increased participation to include increased opportunities in leadership, governance, etc. Reduced inequalities. This is about health equity. We know that COVID-19 and the pandemic has not so much caused inequalities as it has shone a light on existing deep-rooted inequalities in our communities, in our society, and it has allowed us to understand that we need to support vulnerable populations, including through sport opportunities going forward. Sustainable cities and communities, this is a no-brainer rather. It's about, of course, having an impact to create a better, more livable communities and cities, and sport has a very important contribution in that area as well. Lastly, partnerships. We will not survive as a sector in sport, physical activity, recreation, if we don't double down on the partnerships across levels and sectors to do our work. So those are the 6 SDGs that are so very important to our work in sport. And so what we want to do now, I think, is ask ourselves, why are the SDGs and policy integration important in our work? And it's because, as I said earlier, these are the ways and means. They provide a ways and means for us to do our job better, to connect to a broader, bigger policy agenda, not only domestically, but internationally. And because all sectors of society, including the private sector and including social enterprises and others, are acting on the SDGs, and the sport community needs to do it even more. So here's one of the reasons why. The SDGs are, in the case of the 6 that I presented, there are 6 ways to position and renew your value proposition around at-risk and vulnerable populations. And so, in other words, your value proposition is how you distinguish distinctly, explicitly, your offering against other offerings in your community. And in this case, sport, recreation, physical activity can help to re-engage citizens in our communities, to offer health-enhancing opportunities, reduce social isolation, any number of reasons why that is helpful. And in particular, for vulnerable populations who are affected most by COVID-19, the SDGs are focused on helping us to be laser focused on that particular critical issue. Secondly, the SDGs provide new entry points to work with new and different community and institutional actors to address shared policy objectives. This is about the new partnerships I talked about earlier. Policy integration is a means, it's a roadmap to contribute to community renewal and recovery. And so your thinking around your recovery in sport should be married to your contributions, to your potential contribution to community recovery writ large. That's how you'll position your value proposition here to be more strategic and more able to be sustainable in the long term. And lastly, when you think about the SDGs and policy integration, they really are a way of being more mission aligned and more purpose driven. This just, as I said, makes you laser focused on what you're doing, why you're doing it, for whom you're doing it, and how to do it the best way possible. And so here's some examples of policy integration in sport. We'll go through these quickly, but the first is Hockey Helps the Homeless, a obviously community-based effort that marries sport participation and addressing the determinants of health that affect homelessness. This is an Ontario-based initiative that includes engaging professional hockey players together with those in need in the community, homeless, to address social determinants and give them a hand up in society. So this is a really good example of how policy integration works. Champions for Life is a school and community-based intervention based out of Quebec, but that is expanding nationally, that teaches physical literacy through prescribed methods that is targeted at low-income children in low-income neighborhoods and communities. And so therein lies the link between being a social purpose, social service effort, and using sport, in this case, physical literacy training, to help make kids more resilient as we move through recovery of this pandemic. You may have heard about the Sport for Social Development effort, which is focused on supporting social needs in Indigenous communities across Canada. Funding from the federal government is up and running through the provinces and territories and by other means. It's an excellent example of how we're addressing Indigenous populations, very vulnerable in the context of COVID, of course, and whom suffer a greater burden of inequality in the first instance. The common vision is, as I mentioned, a physical activity policy that was put in play at a pan-Canadian level in 2018. And it is about alignment between the Canadian sport policy, the Framework for Recreation in Canada, and Active Canada 2020, an NGO policy that was introduced in 2011, but also Curbing Childhood Obesity, which is a health-based policy framework. And so you can see the connection between these three and positioning the contribution of physical activity, recreation, and sport in health. That's another good example of crossing that bridge. Last two, Bounce Back League is an initiative of the Boys and Girls Clubs of Canada, which addresses the burden that's being experienced by children and youth as a consequence of trauma that they've experienced in their life. So trauma-informed policies and programming are embedded. It is central to the Bounce Back League, i.e. helping kids to bounce back from a trauma that they've experienced at the familiar level, at the community level. And again, it's about contributing to resiliency and social outcomes through sport and movement. And lastly, Fit Spirit School is about the gender equality piece. It's about marrying sport to support young girls and women to become leaders, not only on the field, but off the field in governance and coaching and other leadership opportunities. So those are just a few that are in the play, if you will, around Canada that really speak to this issue of policy integration. So what are the tools available to you? Here are some, and there are others. The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, has an excellent policy coherence for sustainable development, toolkit. Online, comprehensive, far-reaching. It applies to the world of sport, so go there and use it to your advantage in thinking about how you can entrench action around the SDGs through your offering in sport. The SDSN, which is the Sustainable Development Solutions Network Canada, based out of the University of Waterloo, is essentially a community of practice. It's about those who are working to address the SDGs across sectors of society, getting together in a virtual community to share information and benefit by collaboration, cooperation. So sport should be there. The Integration of Health in All Policies framework was developed by the National Collaborating Center for Healthy Public Policy. And herein again, this is about rooting your delivery of sport offerings in a health context to contribute to improved health. And of course, in the context of recovery, in the context of renewal with the COVID pandemic, centrally, governments and other institutions are looking for offerings in the community that contribute to improved health. And so that's why it's really important to you right now. Stats Canada, second lastly, really has the Sustainable Development Goals Data Hub. It is an excellent, huge, comprehensive database of the goings on in Canada all across different sectors for why or how we're contributing to the Sustainable Development Goals, which the UN, United Nations, aims to be achieved by 2030. And so go there, use that data hub for your benefit. Lastly, Sport for Life in itself has an international effort connecting to the SDGs to sport participation, to physical literacy development in communities across different countries. And so there's a tool for you right there to see how policy integration and the notion of regaining momentum can help you along the way. So here are 10 things to take away. I'll be very quick about these, but let's be focused on making momentum a way for you to contribute to transformational change, not just incremental change. And that transformational change will happen when you are working through integration with other policy domains, other sectors of society. Offer to show others how sport contributes to social outcomes and impact. And some of you are doing that very well. We need to do it more. View your network as a vehicle to apply sport community recovery efforts. You all exist in a professional and personal network. Use those networks to your advantage. Emphasize that sport contributes to economic recovery. It's not lost on any of us that the fiscal impact of and economic impact of COVID is unprecedented. And so when you talk to governments and you talk to other institutions, one of their first areas of thinking is cost recovery. How can you position your sport contribution with that in mind? Make it your business to position sport as a solution to address health equity. We talked a little bit about that, but that's a key takeaway. Engage with local leaders from other sectors of policy areas. These are your friends, your colleagues who work in other domains that you should be working with. The next one is about relationships. These collaborations don't happen by picking up the phone once. This is about nurturing relationships over time. Take a chance on a new partnership. You're never quite sure whether it's going to work, but you need to trust the process. You need to trust the fact that others are interested in your offering and you and theirs. And so use that as an opportunity to just kind of step off the edge and take a little bit of a risk. Understand that the potential partners view your offering through their lens. Talk to them about their needs first, their interests first. Come around to yours from the back door, if you will. Lastly, marry your passion for sport with your passion to help others. We're all passionate about sport delivery. We need to be more passionate now in the context of helping community residents recover and renew from COVID pandemic. We're out of time, but thanks so much for joining me. Please be in touch if you want to hear more about regaining momentum or any of the content I've delivered through this presentation at my email that you see here. I do appreciate you taking the time to join me today. So thanks. Take care.